Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Yehud in South Carolina, Karen in Northern California, Lucy in Minnesota, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Gordo in Scotland. Always great to see your name on Fridays when it's not the middle of the night for art class. Aoife in Florida, Lester in Florida, Franco in Trieste, Italy. Also, love to see you live on Fridays. And Debbie in Toms River, New Jersey, where we are going down to -4 degrees tonight. Whoa. And I know that's not centigrade. -4. That's crazy. 36 degrees below freezing. May you be warm. May you be cozy. Our daf today, we're going to do a double, but it's still going to be a short class, I believe. Pages 20 and 21 here in Tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 2, right? Mishna number 2 here in chapter 3. Sort of problems or mistakes or, issues that would not, that are problematic but would not render the offering unfit, is what we're discussing now. And we got a good head start on page 20a yesterday. We're actually near the bottom of 20a. Okay, so the Gemara continues a discussion of the Baraisa that we heard yesterday. The master said above that the verse states, "Neither shall you suffer the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meal offering." Now we've learned elsewhere that everything that is burned on the altar, right, an offering to the Lord, has to be accompanied by salt. There's that general provision about salt. And then salt is also mentioned here with respect to the meal offering specifically. And so that sort of frees up this law here about the meal offering, since we already knew that salt has to be on everything that's offered up on the altar. So what does this come to teach us? So basically, salt is going to accompany every meal offering and any animal offering that is burned on the altar. It's actually also going to accompany the incense, but it will not accompany the wood, right? The wood that is burned on the altar, that is used to burn the animal offerings and the meal offerings. So salt doesn't go on the wood. And then the blood, which is sprinkled on the altar, is not tossed in the fire. So that is not going to be accompanied by salt either. Okay, so let's keep reading here. The master said above, the verse states, "Neither shall you suffer the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meal offering." And this, we understood yesterday, demonstrates that salt cannot be lacking from the meal offering, but not from your blood, right? The salt does not get applied to the presentation of blood on the altar when animal offerings are brought. So the Gemara asks, but since the verse does not allude to the blood explicitly, why not say that the verse teaches that salt cannot be lacking from your meal offering, but not from your limbs of the burnt offering that are sacrificed on the altar? Why are we going to say it doesn't apply to the blood? Maybe we should say it doesn't apply to the limbs of the animal offering that's brought as a burnt offering. So the Gemara answers, it stands to reason that the limbs of a burnt offering should be included in the requirement to have salt applied. Why? Since they share many characteristics with a meal offering that the blood of an animal offering does not share. And the Gemara presents a mnemonic for the characteristics that they share. Aleph, Shin, Beis, Nun, Tes, Mem, Aleph, right? These letters are going to signal to us, if we were memorizing the Gemara, what is ahead. These are references to others, acherim, that usually is a coded or veiled reference to a teaching of Rabbi Meir. Fire, ishim, external, bachutz, nasar, ritual impurity, tuma, and misuse of consecrated property, me'ila. So in the case of the limbs of a burnt offering, other items come as a requirement for it, as is the law with regard to a meal offering. The burnt offering requires wood in order to be burned on the altar, which is not the case with regard to the blood. Since the blood is sprinkled on the side of the altar, it is not placed on the fire on top of the altar. Whereas the blood does not. And the limbs of the burnt offering are burned in the fire of the altar, as is the law with regard to a meal offering, whereas the blood is presented on the corners of the altar. The burnt offering is sacrificed on the external altar, as is the law with a meal offering, as opposed to the blood, which is sometimes presented outside on the external altar and sometimes presented inside the sanctuary on the inner altar, the golden altar on which the incense is burned. Inside the sanctuary, in the cases of the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, for example. And it is prohibited to partake of its leftover parts, the nasar, as is the law with regard to a meal offering. And this is not relevant to the blood, since the blood is never consumed. It is prohibited to partake of a burnt offering while in a state of tuma, ritual impurity, as is the law with a meal offering. And this is not relevant to the blood because the blood is never consumed. It is subject to the laws of me'ila, misuse of consecrated property, as is the law with regard to a meal offering, which is not so with regard to the blood. Now we're on page 20b. Now the Gemara objects to this proof. On the contrary, blood should be included in the requirement to have salt applied, since it renders the offering permitted to be sacrificed and eaten, as is so with regard to the handful of a meal offering, which renders the remainder of the meal offering permitted to be eaten. And in addition, blood becomes invalid at sunset and can no longer be sprinkled on the altar, as is the law with regard to the handful of a meal offering, whereas the limbs of the burnt offering may be sacrificed at any point during the night. And the Gemara responds, these characteristics shared by the meal offering and the limbs of the burnt offering are more than those shared by the blood and the meal offering. And so we're going to apply the requirement of salting to meal offerings and the limbs of a burnt offering, and we're not going to apply it to the blood of an animal offering that is sprinkled on the altar. Now, the Gemara continues discussing this baraisa. The master said above, had the verse stated only, and every offering you shall season with salt, I would derive that this applies even to the wood and the blood, which are also termed an offering, right? That terminology is used with regard to the blood and the wood since they come up on the altar. Therefore, the verse states, and every meal offering of yours, to teach that just as the meal offering is unique in that other items come as a requirement for it, so too anything that is unique in that other items come as a requirement for it requires the application of salt. Therefore, the wood and the blood do not require salting, as wood is not brought to burn wood, right? Wood is brought to burn the limbs of the meal offering or the meal offering. And blood doesn't require anything. It is just sprinkled directly on the altar. So therefore, the wood and the blood do not require salting, as in their case, no other item is needed. And the Gemara asks, whom did you hear who says that the wood is termed an offering? It is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. But according to Rabbi, doesn't the wood, in fact, require salting? Does Rabbi say that the wood requires salting? And this is as it is taught in the Baraisa. The verse states, and when one brings a meal offering, a korban mincha, in Leviticus 2:1, and the superfluous word korban, right, which is the word we use for offering, teaches that one can voluntarily give wood as an offering for the altar, right? So there are different offerings that you could bring. If you are, obligated to bring a sin offering because you unwittingly violated a prohibition, which if you did intentionally would result in kares, okay, there you don't have a choice. You're obligated to bring a sin offering. But if you wanted to show your appreciation to God when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, there are various ways you could do that, right? Free will offerings. So you could vow to bring a peace offering. You could vow to bring a thanks offering. You could vow to make a donation to the temple treasury. Or you could vow to donate wood for the fire on the altar as a gift offering to the Lord that you're going to bring to the Holy Temple. You're going to bring wood, right? That's your gift to the Holy Temple. You can do that. So the superfluous word korban teaches that one can voluntarily give wood as an offering for the altar. And how much wood must one bring if he does not specify an amount? If he says, I'm just going to bring wood, well then what's the minimum amount of wood that he can bring to fulfill that vow? And the minimum is 2 logs. Right? Now, we're not talking about a log, which is a Hebrew word for a volume that we use like a log of oil. Here we're talking about the English word log, right? Like a log that we burn in the fireplace. Where am I? So 2 logs. And the support for the fact that wood can be brought as a voluntary offering is from a verse. As the verse states, and we cast lots for the wood offering in Nehemiah 10:35. Or Nehemiah, how do you say that in Hebrew? The citation's not given here. Elon, it's Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah, okay. So 2 logs, where am I? And we cast lots for the wood offering in Nehemiah 10:35. And Rebbe says this voluntary donation of wood is an offering like a meal offering, and therefore requires salt and requires bringing to the corner of the altar like a meal offering. And Rava says, according to the statement of Rebbe, wood donated in this manner requires the removal of a handful. Just as in the case of a meal offering, a portion of the wood must be removed and sacrificed separately. And Rav Papa says that according to the statement of Rebbe, since it is an offering for the altar, the wood that is brought as an offering needs to be placed on other wood to burn, like any other offering that is burned on wood on the altar. So apparently this means that Rebbe, who holds that the wood is termed an offering, also holds that it requires the application of salt, in contrast to the ruling in the Baraisa. So it's very interesting. When you might have thought that, well, I vow to bring, or a person vows to bring wood for the altar, that what they're offering is to provide the wood that is used on the pyre on top of the altar in order to bring other offerings. But it seems here that what Rebbe is suggesting, no, you're offering to bring wood for the purpose of burning it on the altar as its own offering, not to help burn other things. In fact, you're going to need other wood to help burn your wood. Very interesting ruling. Now the Gemara responds, remove wood from the Baraisa here, as it is not excluded by the term and every meal offering of yours. And the Gemara asks, but then the phrase in the verse, and every meal offering of yours, comes to exclude what? If it serves to exclude blood, Well, this is derived from the continuation of the verse, which states, from your meal offering, as explained in the continuation of the brisa. That's the phrase that is excluding blood. So what is the first part of that phrase coming to exclude if not the wood? Now we're on page 21a. So the Gemara responds, wood is removed from the brisa and insert in its place wine libations, teaching that they do not require the addition of salt, as it is taught in the brisa, but the wine libations and the blood and the wood and the incense do not require salt. Now let me just read where the law ended up on this. There is a positive mitzvah to apply salt to all offerings, and nothing may be sacrificed on the altar without salt, except for wine libations, blood, and wood. Those do not get salted. 1/4 cob of salt of Sodom is added to the incense after its spices are crushed. This is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis and not in accordance with this baraisa here that we are citing. Right? So the incense actually does get salted, but in this baraisa it does not. Okay. Where am I? The wood and the incense do not require salt. So the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this baraisa? If you say it is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe, the ruling of the baraisa concerning wood is difficult, as the baraisa rules that wood does not require salt, whereas Rebbe holds that the wood does require salt. And if you say it is the opinion of the rabbis, right, the majority, the ruling of the baraisa concerning incense is difficult, as they taught in the baraisa on page 20 that any item for which another item is necessary requires salt, and this includes the incense, which is burned with wood, right, which is where the law ends up. And the Gemara suggests the baraisa is in accordance with this following Tana, this sage of the Mishnaic period, who explains the verse that was interpreted in the baraisa in a different manner. As it is taught in the baraisa, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, says, the verse states, and every meal offering of yours you shall season with salt, and just as the specified detail, i.e. the meal offering, is an item that is susceptible to tumah, ritual impurity, and is brought on the fire of the altar, and is sacrificed on the external altar, so too any item that is susceptible to tumah and is brought on the fire of the altar and is sacrificed on the external altar requires salting. Therefore, wood is excluded. Wood cannot become tameh. Wine and blood are excluded, as they are not brought on the fire of the altar, but rather are sprinkled on the corner of the altar. And the incense is excluded by this baraisa, as it is sacrificed not on the external altar, but rather on the inner altar. And the Gemara asks, but how can it be that according to all opinions, the reason that blood does not require salting is that the verse excluded blood, indicating that if not for that, I would say that blood requires salt. Once one salts the blood, it exits the category of blood. As Zeri says that Rabbi Hanina says, with regard to blood that one cooked, one does not transgress the prohibition against consuming blood by drinking it, since it no longer has the status of blood that is fit to be presented on the altar. And Rabbi Yehuda says that Zeri says, with regard to blood that one salted, one does not transgress a prohibition by drinking it, since salted blood has the status of cooked blood. Now, actually, it is prohibited to eat blood even if it is cooked. Now, some blood obviously comes in the meat that we buy, but, kosher meat, in addition to that, it was a kosher animal that was slaughtered in a kosher manner, with a very specific, very sharp cut across the trachea and the esophagus, and it bleeds out. And then the blood is all drained from the body as much as humanly possible. And then the meat is salted to remove even more blood from the body. So kosher meat has very little blood in it. As much as can be removed has been removed. And if you would, just take like a cup of blood and then cook it or do something with it to transform it into something else, that is not going to render it permitted for Jews to eat, despite what it says here. And similarly, Rabbi Yehuda himself says, with regard to the limbs of a burnt offering that one fire roasted and afterward brought them up on the altar, they do not constitute fulfillment of the requirement of the verse that an offering be an aroma pleasing to the Lord. But when you're talking about the sacrificial portions of animal offerings, or all the limbs of a burnt offering, which are placed on the fire of the altar, they cannot be cooked first. They cannot be roasted first, right? That has to be raw meat that is then placed on the fire of the altar. And if it was already pre-cooked, then this would violate the requirement of offerings that when they are placed on the fire, it's done so in order to create a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Now, it's interesting because as I've shared with you many times, Rashi tells us that really what is pleasing to the Lord is that he issued a commandment and we followed it, not, the smell of the barbecued meat. God doesn't need that from us, but what he loves is that, we're all his children that he loves. And when he issues commandments to us and we follow them, that is very pleasing to the Lord. Okay, the Gemara discusses the matter. And so, if it was cooked meat, then that would not be the way that God commanded us to place it on the fire on the altar. Okay, next topic. The Gemara, and by the way, nice Yiddish word that if you attend a more yeshivish daf yomi shir, when we reach, place of next topic, they would say weiter, right? Weiter, onward, forward. Let's go further. Weiter. So when I'm learning Tractate Megillah with one of my teachers, wonderful teacher, Rabbi Menachot, he's saying that frequently, weiter, as we move on to the next step. So you might hear me start saying that sometimes. Weiter. The Gemara discusses the matter itself. Zeri says that Rabbi Hanina says, with regard to blood that one cooked, one does not transgress a prohibition by drinking it. Again, that is not the halacha, but that's what it says here. Rava was sitting and saying this law, and Abaye raised an objection to him from a baraisa. If one curdled blood and consumed it, or in a case where one melted forbidden fat and swallowed it, even though he changed its form, he is liable. And this demonstrates that even after its form is changed, the blood's status remains unchanged, right? And that is the law about consuming blood, because that's such a strong prohibition on the Jews. On the other hand, interesting, the forbidden fat, that's a portion of the animal that is not kosher for Jews to eat, even though it comes from a kosher animal. If it was melted down, and so it was like, boiling fat, right? Like liquid that is still boiling, and you ate that, then you would not have violated the prohibition against eating forbidden fat, because that would not be called an act of eating. Because it's boiling fat, it's going to burn your throat, it's going to harm you, it's going to hurt you. So when we say eating, that has a connotation of eating in a pleasurable manner, eating in the way that people eat. And that's not the way that people eat. Now, Rava responded, this is not difficult, as here, Zeri's statement relates to a case where he curdled the blood by means of the fire, whereas there, in the case of the Baraisa, he curdled the blood by means of the sun. Blood curdled by means of a fire cannot return to its former state, so one is not liable, whereas blood curdled by means of the sun can return to its former state, and so one is liable. Abaye objected. But even when the blood is curdled by means of the sun, let us say that since it was disqualified from being presented on the altar, it was disqualified, in this context, excluded from the prohibition against consuming blood. As Rabbi Mani inquired of Rabbi Yochanan, with regard to blood that was congealed and one ate it, what is the law? And Rabbi Yochanan responded, he is not liable. Since it was disqualified from being presented on the altar, it shall be disqualified from the prohibition against consuming blood, because it's not blood anymore. And Rava was silent and had no answer. So Abaye said to him, perhaps the Baraisa is certainly referring to the blood of the external sin offerings, which is sprinkled on the external altar in the temple courtyard, whereas there, Zeri is referring to the blood of inner sin offerings, which is sprinkled inside the sanctuary. Rava said to him, you have reminded me of a matter. As Rabbi Chisda says, with regard to blood that became congealed, if it is the blood of an external sin offering and one ate it, he is liable. As the merciful one states in the Torah, and the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it upon the corners of the altar of burnt offering. And congealed blood is suitable for taking and placing, as one can take the congealed blood and place it upon the altar. By contrast, if it is blood of the inner sin offerings and one ate it, he is exempt, as the merciful one states in the Torah, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle of the blood, and this congealed blood is not suitable for dipping and sprinkling. So there are multiple prohibitions at work here. There's always the prohibition against consuming blood. What they're really asking is, but would you have violated the prohibition of me'ila, right? Of taking personal benefit of something that is sanctified, and may perhaps not. And Rava himself says, even if there was blood of the inner sin offerings and one ate it, he is liable, since blood corresponding to the blood is suitable to be placed on the altar in the case of the external sin offerings. And Rav Papa says, therefore, according to the same reasoning, in the case of the blood of a donkey, which is not a kosher animal, not for eating, and not for bringing as an offering, although we do have to redeem the firstborn of a donkey by exchanging it for a sheep, and bring that as an offering. Therefore, according to the same reasoning, in the case of the blood of a donkey that became congealed and one ate it, he is liable, despite the fact that a donkey's blood is not fit to be brought as an offering, since blood corresponding to this blood is suitable to be placed on the altar in the case of the external sin offerings, like a sheep that was brought on behalf of a donkey. And in the context of the laws of blood, Rav Giddel says that Zeri says, blood, whether moist or dry, interposes during mikveh. Right? When you immerse in a mikveh, if it's a mandatory immersion, like a woman, after she's counted 7 days after her menses, immerses in the mikveh, or somebody who's converting to Judaism must immerse in a mikveh. So during one of these mandatory immersions, there cannot be anything interposing between your body and the water of the mikveh. All jewelry must be removed. And if there's something on your skin, the question is that going to be an interposition between your skin and the water of the mikveh? If that thing on your skin is blood, answer is yes, that interposes, because blood is very significant. Blood, whether moist or dry, interposes in the mikveh when one immerses in the mikveh. And the Gemara raised an objection from a baraisa with regard to blood, ink, honey, or milk on a person's skin. When they are dry, they interpose during immersion in the mikveh, but when they are moist, they do not interpose. And the Gemara explains this contradiction is not difficult. La kasha. This statement of Rav Giddel is referring to a case where the blood adheres to the skin as it has begun to congeal, and therefore it interposes. And that baraisa is referring to a case where the blood did not adhere, and therefore it does not interpose, because it'll just, drift off in the mikveh and then become nullified in the waters of the mikveh. Now the Gemara returns to its interpretation of the verse. And every meal offering of yours you shall season with salt. And asks, for what purpose does the expression you shall season come? Why not just say you add salt? So the Gemara answers, it is written for that which is taught in a baraisa. Had the verse stated only, and every meal offering of yours shall be with salt, one might have thought that the law is tevoinahu, a term that will be explained in the Gemara. Therefore, the verse states, you shall season. Conversely, had the verse stated only, you shall season, one might have thought that this obligation can be fulfilled by means of adding salt water. Therefore, the verse states, with salt. Now, the continuation of the verse, and you shall not omit salt from your meal offering. This teaches that one should bring salt that never rests, shovetet, i.e., it is found continuously. And what type of salt is this? This is referring to the salt of Sodom. And from where is it derived? That if one did not find salt of Sodom, that he should bring salt of Istrokanit, which is quarried from rock. And the verse states immediately afterward, with all your offerings you shall sacrifice salt. In order to emphasize that, you should sacrifice any type of salt. You should sacrifice salt from any place, even from a location outside of Eretz Yisrael. You should sacrifice salt even on Shabbos. There are offerings that are brought on Shabbos, and they must be accompanied by salt. And you should sacrifice salt even in a state of Tumah, When are offerings brought in a state of tuma? When the majority of the people are tameh, or the majority of the priests are tameh, then even though so many people are tameh, the offering will be brought, but the offering of an individual is not brought. This is with respect to communal offerings. And the Gemara clarifies, what is the meaning of the term tevonehu? And Rabba Bar Ula said, this is what the Bryce is saying. One might have thought that one should mix into it, yitabonenu, large quantities of salt, just as one mixes straw, tevin, into clay. Abaye said to him, if so, the Bryce should have said yitabonenu and not tevonehu. So rather, Abaye said, the Bryce is saying that. One might have thought that one should form the addition of salt just as one builds a building, binyan, by adding layer upon layer. So Rava said to him, if so, the Brisa should have said he should build it, yivnenu, and not tevonehu. Rather, Rava said, the Brisa states, one might have thought tevonehu. So the Gemara asks, what is meant by tevonehu? And Rav Ashi said, one might have thought that one should infuse the entire offering with the taste of salt, just as understanding, bina, a similar root, infuses a person with wisdom. And to counter this, the verse states, you shall season. So how does he act? He brings the limb that is to be sacrificed upon the altar, and he applies salt, and then he turns it over, and again applies salt, and then he brings it on the altar, right? He sprinkles some salt on two sides of the limb. That is considered seasoned with salt. Now he can put on the fire of the altar. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So Abaye says, and one acts similarly before placing meat into a pot. Hold it. This is always annoying when this thing signs me out. Okay, there we go. And Abaye says, and one acts similarly before placing meat into a pot. If one wishes to cook meat and needs to salt it in order to extract its blood, it is sufficient to apply salt to both sides and let it sit until the blood drains. Then, after it is washed, the meat is ready to be cooked and eaten, right? That's how we remove blood from the meat. Since we don't consume blood, we use salt to extract even more blood from the meat before we cook it. Now we're on page 21b. And the sages taught in a baraisa with regard to salt that is on the limb of an offering. One who derives benefit from it is liable to misuse of consecrated property, me'ilah. But in the case of salt that is on the ramp or that is on top of the altar, one who derives benefit from it is not liable for me'ilah. And Rabbi Matana added, what is the verse from which it is derived that salt found upon a sacrificial limb is subject to the laws of Me'ilah? The verse states, and you shall sacrifice them before the Lord, and the priest shall cast salt upon them, and they shall offer them up for a burnt offering to the Lord. In this verse, the limbs together with the salt are termed a burnt offering, and therefore the salt on the limb is also subject to the laws of Me'ilah. And perhaps we'll see when we resume tomorrow night why salt that's already on the ramp would not be subject to Me'ilah, perhaps because it's already done its job. We shall see. Okay, just a couple questions. Joe, are there any minimum lengths required for the logs? What about diameter of the type of tree? Saw a note about this earlier. Let me see. One who brings wood. Where was it? Okay, that one can voluntarily give wood. Okay. One who says, it is incumbent upon me to bring wood to the altar, must bring no less than 2 logs of wood that are at least 1 cubit long. That's pretty much a standard size for logs that we put in our fireplace, I would say, about 1 cubit. And 1 cubit long, where am I? Must bring no less than 2 logs of wood that are at least 1 cubit long and have the thickness of a level used for leveling a mound of grain. Okay, so that was an implement that was, I guess, pretty well known to farmers in that period, where they would level their mounds of grain. That's the thickness, the minimum thickness of a log if you're bringing it as an offering. And if he said, it is incumbent upon me to bring a log of wood, he should bring one log. If he prefers, he may instead donate the value of the wood. This is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis and not that of Rebbe. And lastly, from Sharon, but you have to bathe or shower prior to immersion in the mikveh. Wouldn't any of those substances have been rinsed off prior to immersion? I would think so. I wonder about that. Obviously now, in the modern world, like the halacha is that before you go in the mikveh, you take a shower. And while men, Jewish men who are already Jewish, are not obligated in mikveh, it is definitely a minhag, a custom, in the Hasidic community to immerse in the mikveh. Chabad does it every day. A lot of people do it on Friday afternoon before Shabbos. Most of the Orthodox world will immerse in a mikveh like before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And certainly we take a shower before we then go in the mikveh. But I'm not sure that, especially in the ancient world where showers wasn't a thing, right? And baths were not so common or available either. So did they have that requirement that they would actually bathe before going in the mikveh, or would they just more like clean themselves off? The ancient world, they did not have the kind of like bath apparatus that we have in the modern world. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just did their best, maybe with wet towels and rags, to clean their bodies off. And maybe they missed a spot. And then after they finished, like if the question comes up, I had something on me, was that a valid immersion or not? And that might be where that question would come up. So that's what I've got for us today. On God's help, we'll see you tomorrow after Shabbos ends. I think last week I got on by like maybe 7:15, maybe closer to 7, but we'll say about 7:15 p.m. tomorrow with God's help, Pacific time, of course.